So, Viet, thank you so much for taking the time today to being a part of our community practice channel here on YouTube. And on behalf of Setsi, thank you so much for taking the time today and showing your leadership.
No, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Absolutely. I'm not sure how amazing it is, but my name is Viet Vu, and I'm the manager of economic research at Dais at Toronto Metropolitan University. So the Dais is a think tank that is based at TMU, and we really focus on sort of proposing bold ideas and sort of training bold leaders to ensure that they're up for the challenge of tomorrow. And so we do a whole bunch of work at the intersection of technology, democracy, and the economy. And today I actually have the pleasure on talking about an exciting project that we're doing with a number of incredible partners that include Imagine Canada, Blueprints, and the Digital Governance Council, particularly focused on sort of the digital opportunity for nonprofit sector.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. So, can you articulate your personal mission and vision for us and what inspires you about the work you do?
That's a big question, isn't it? I think a lot of my work has ended up being about ensuring that a whole bunch of people whose voices deserve to be represented in sort of conversations that surround power about creating policies that impacts every single person that lives in this country, right? But the reality right now is that a lot of those voices aren't actually heard and aren't actually there at the table. And so my work personally, and certainly the Dais's work, is about creating that platform so that those voices, those individuals, those perspectives are actually very much part of this conversation. And that, I think, philosophy is kind of why I'm very excited about this project, because oftentimes when we talk about digital skills, digitization, AI, all of these cutting edge technologies, we're often talking about sort of private businesses, how big companies will be using it, how it will impact the economy. But there's another sort of crucial area of the economy and also our society, which are essentially community service organizations, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations. Those folks who work to sort of plug the gap that is left behind by society that actually support so many people also deserve a table at this important conversation on how best they can be using technology to ensure that their service offering is as efficient and as good as possible. And so that's why I'm particularly excited about this project.
Wow, good points, good points. And you mentioned, the voice for the voiceless, the one that, can't be heard. I mean, that's what we're about too, really amplifying the voice of the ones that actually are quiet. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
To really
I
get it
hear
out
you.
there.
Yeah.
Yes, very good, very good. So, on the flip side now, what challenges or barriers have you come across and how were you able to overcome them?
Huh. So the way that our work that is led by the Dais, there are a number of other pieces or that are led by other partners that I might not be at liberty to sort of talk in too much detail about. But the way that the Dais has approached analyzing sort of the digital opportunity and, as you sort of mentioned, challenges in the nonprofit sector is sort of by taking two lenses at it. On the first lens, we actually focus on the state of tech workers that work within the nonprofit sector. And so these are your sort of web administrators, the people who keep the background database running, the IT department, if you will, that are often directly embedded within nonprofits or perhaps contracted from the outside. So we focus on essentially those people who are really, really highly technical skilled. The second perspective that we use to understand sort of the nonprofit sector is actually by understanding what kind of digital skills non-tech people who are working in nonprofit also need. And so, for example, myself, I use things like, Google Docs and Microsoft Word, those sort of basic programs to the technologies that is involved in making this call happen, whether that be Zoom or this microphone that I'm using. And so in addition to those highly, highly skilled or technically skilled employees, what do non-technical employees also need to know in this sort of digital age? And what we unfortunately find is that in the nonprofit sector, there's fewer tech workers working in it than compared to outside the nonprofit sector. And for those who are working in the nonprofit sector who are not technical, there's also fewer sort of digital skills that are being demanded that are of sort of like a highly complex or highly technical sense. And so what I mean by that is that a broader sort of like in the broad economy, about 5% of the workforce belong to this group of highly technical worker. For the nonprofit sector, that's just 1%. And so it's actually 20% or like 80% fewer, if you will, in the nonprofit sector. And crucially, they also receive lower level of pay compared to those tech workers that are working outside of the economy. But there's actually a really interesting opportunity here because we also looked at the diversity and the makeup of who these tech workers are. And that is actually where the nonprofit sector excels. A nonprofit tech worker actually is much more likely to be women, much more likely to be newcomers, much more likely to have an identity that isn't a Caucasian identity or white identity. And so there are all of these like sort of hidden opportunities that exist within the nonprofit tech workforce. On the skill side, it might not surprise you to know that the single most demanded sort of digital skills for nonprofit tech workers are the Microsoft sort of suite. And so that is Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. And all of these advanced sort of AI or tech skills that we've sort of heard a lot about in the news, let's say like AI or blockchain, doesn't really show up in the demand for nonprofit workers, even though we're seeing signs that it is increasing. And so those, I think, some of the initial sort of look about the challenges facing nonprofit sector in Canada.
I love how you brought the challenges, but then it's like the overcome part is so powerful when you said when you look at it in a perspective of the nonprofit sector is employing, non-Caucasian, they're women predominantly, so it's really seeing the growth there, and
Mhm.
definitely, like you were saying with the AI, that will grow eventually because they're going to see, how convenient, I'm finding that, the backdrop you see there, I did it with AI, and it's so, it was
Yeah,
amazing. So once they realize, and, because the nonprofit work is not an easy one. So when you can implement tools to make your life a little bit more easier, that's only going to be a win-win on both
that's
sides.
exactly it, right? But
Mhm.
interesting enough, that's I think where a lot of nonprofit organizations actually face an incredibly sort of common challenge, which surround funding. We found that like a lot of nonprofit wants to be investing in this sort of capacity building, wants to be investing in these digital infrastructure, but when it comes time for them to be applying to grant programs and funding programs, oftentimes things like overhead, things like capital expenditure are actually excluded from a list of sort of eligible funding expenditure. And so even if there is this sort of demand that nonprofit organizations want to be investing in these things, the funding structure doesn't easily allow for that. And so we actually make a fairly important point, perhaps directed at people sort of designing these funding programs and giving out money, to also ensure that there is a dedicated pool of resources that organization can actually use to sort of up level their organization and sort of invest in these really necessary infrastructures.
Oh, that's you hit it on the nail. I'm telling you, right on the head because I mean, and we need to be bullish about this because of the fact that we don't want to get left behind. It's
That's
nonprofit,
exactly it.
but we're not back in 1980. You know what I mean? Let's keep up, with the
Yep.
speed of society.
But that's exactly it, right? Because I'm sure that you also know this, and many sort of folks who work in other community service organization knows this as well. The way that you interact with your clients, your community, your constituents has also shifted. It used to be that you would probably have a phone call with the people that you're serving. Now, there are a lot of people who text these people through apps like WhatsApp. You're now on Instagram creating stories and engaging with the community that you serve in a wholly different way. And so, unless you can also sort of meet your constituent at their level, you're also falling behind on fulfilling your mission, right?
Exactly. Oh, this is awesome. Thank you so much for that. So what are some of the things you're working on? What are some of your key priorities that you're working on now?
Yeah. So, a couple of recommendations that we have sort of put forward in the two pieces that I'm talking mostly about um, include the fact that nonprofits need to be thinking clearly about a tech talent strategy. And what I mean by that is that there's this acknowledgement that a worker, when considering a job, has a whole number of options to consider, right? They could be going to government, they could be going to the private sector, they can be going into the nonprofit sector. And unfortunately, one place in which nonprofit sector cannot be as competitive in attracting sort of the best technical talent has to do with pay. And there's a reality which is complicated and complex surrounding funding structure, even pay equity within the organization, where if you try to sort of pay a particular group of people, let's say tech people, a whole lot more money so that they're actually competitive at the market wage, that might then create a pay inequality that actually exists within the organization, right? And so our sort of recommendation is that you need to think up your tech talent as a holistic sort of strategy, which is that pay being a part of it, but the work condition and being another part of it. One of those sort of like non-pay benefit that tech workers tend to value a ton is, let's say, the ability to work remotely from anywhere. And so actually thinking about what tech worker want in their work environment and incorporating it to the best of your ability is also important. And the second thing is that we sort of recommend is actually thinking about how to cost effectively upskill your entire talent sort of like resources within the organization. And we actually see a role of a particular device, which is called a micro-credential, can play in this. So this is based on another separate piece of research that we did, focusing on understanding how people are sort of using micro-credentials. And we actually found out that sort of traditional university degrees are really great at teaching broad knowledge areas that people can then apply to a whole bunch of different problems. But micro credentials are actually really, really good at teaching you how to use one specific tool. There's a micro credential if you want to upskill your skill in Microsoft Excel. There's another micro credential if you want to use a data visualization tool. And so, if there is a demand for the entire organization's workforce to know how to use a particular sort of tool or use a particular tool to fit an actual well-defined business objective, those are the cases in which micro-credential can actually play a huge role and also a cost-effective role as well, because many of these programs tend to be either low cost or at no cost whatsoever.
Oh, Viet, you're hitting so many points here. Like, I love it. And that's why it's so important for collaboration because you made mention of like pay. Now, I see like in society now, things are more like implementation of maybe like work-life balance, to be able to say, okay, on a nonprofit side, we can't really pay you more, but guess what? You're going to have better work life balance because you can go anywhere in the world to work. So you're giving people the freedom to have that in their mind to be like, hey, I don't have the stress of having to go into an office. I can be right in my home. So guess what? Sometimes that's a little bit better than pay because to have that mindset of being free like that or travel in the world and work is
That's
priceless.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of that pooling resources wise, I do want to make perhaps one additional point on that, right? Is that every single nonprofit face a financial reality that often is not pretty. That you perhaps are constantly having to apply for funding to stay alive. You're constantly figuring out where you can be saving money so that you can't perhaps have access to this sort of pool of resources that just exist that you can sort of put towards this one single priority. And that's where sort of a consortium model, a model, let's say like realized through that's the Canadian Nonprofits Digital Resilience, Canadian Center for Nonprofit Digital Resiliency, CINDR, where resources from multiple organizations are pulled to create common resources or a common infrastructure that a lot of nonprofits can rely on together also become an important thing as well.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Oh, this is awesome. All right. So tell me, how do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada?
Ah, dear. I mean, I think Canada currently face a whole number of big challenges, from sort of an aging population to perhaps a crisis that relates to housing and affordability that we have been hearing so much about. And in a perfect world, public policy and economic policy would generally solve all of these sort of structural problems, right? Because I don't think, from a philosophical standpoint, that nonprofit organizations and community service organizations should be tasked with solving sort of fundamental structural issues with our society, because that is the role of the government. That is the role of government policy. But there continues to be this really important role for people who are struggling right now, whose help might not arrive until a little bit down the line, who still needs that support today. And these are the roles that I think the spaces in which nonprofits and community service organizations occupy and have occupied for for a long, long time now. And I don't see that changing. At the same time, the people you serve is sort of changing. Um, in Canada, we have a whole lot more newcomers than we have had previously. Even in urban settings, there are way more Indigenous people who live in urban settings who might not be living on reserved land, who might be accessing various different services, whether that be cultural or health-wise, that is specific to the Indigenous demand. There's a whole lot of knowledge and an awareness now about various different identities, whether that be sexual orientations, gender identity, even disability identities. And so the landscape of who the group of people that nonprofit organizations are serving is also shifting as well. And so I do think that the future of community service organization look a little bit unsettled right now, perhaps. There's a bit of an anxiety about whether the current model, the model that seems to have worked before the pandemic, before all of this disruption, before all of these changes, continue to be relevant into the future. And so I think this is kind of the moment to ask those big questions and make those big bets, perhaps investing in digital resources, investing in sort of your organization's capacity. So I do think it's quite an exciting time, even though it might be a little bit uncertain.
I totally agree. I mean, we are doing the work for and passing the baton on in future generations. So we have to do all that we can in this time and really addressing, like you said, this is a governmental issue and it should be addressed firmly to them because resources are not being allocated fairly in this sector. You know what I mean? So this is something that definitely needs to be addressed because guess what? The problem's not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's
It's just
exactly
going
it.
to keep building and building and building. So people like us that we're really expressing the need for change. We have to do what we can to like how should I put it, like realign the priorities back to the government because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
again resources magically appear when they when they wanted to appear. So yeah, accountability needs to be held there for sure. That's
Yeah.
excellent. Excellent. All right. So tell me your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you?
I mean, I think success through this project might be different from what you might be thinking initially, right? Because guess what? I'm someone who absolutely believes that there are places that doesn't have a role for technology to play in, um, especially in a nonprofit community service setting, where at its core, it's about a human to human relationship. It's about creating that sort of one-on-one, the actual relationship with the community you're serving, embedding within it, and sort of defining the problem together and solving that problem together. That is not technological. That is social. And so what I'm not advocating for is for every single processes in a nonprofit organization to become digitized, to have AI sort of play a large role in it, because I think that's quite a silly future. But the future we should be striving for, right, is ensuring that nonprofit organizations and nonprofit workers get to a place where they can actually articulate the problem that they're facing and are equipped with the knowledge and the resource to evaluate between a range of different options, of which digital solutions can be one of them. So that when a nonprofit organization or nonprofit worker adopt a digital tool or an AI tool, they're actually confident in ensuring that that tool that they're adopting is fit for purpose, is in fact the best way to be solving that problem, instead of irresponsibly just adopting any technology into to any problem that they're facing, right? And so I think that is sort of the desired end goal, so that there is a capacity to be making those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
I totally agree. I think implementing tools, whether it be AI or such, so that you can have more time with that human to human contact.
Yeah,
Because a lot of times, some of the things that can be done digitally or whatever can be done so that, hey, now have more, I can allocate more
yeah,
time to have that human to human relation. So it can be a balance in that way. So I
yeah,
totally
that's
agree.
exactly it. No.
Hmm. This is amazing. Well, I mean, this, I know a lot of people are going to be inspired and really, appreciate your leadership in this, and they feel, and I feel your passion in this as well. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And the last question I have for you is any closing thoughts or calls to action at this time?
Man, I guess if there's anything that I want to leave people behind, is for them to actually think critically the next time they see a headline about how amazing AI is, how AI will be transforming everything. AI is just a tool. AI is a piece of technology that doesn't think, that doesn't reason, that doesn't actually do anything unless if it is used by people. And so every time you look at I don't want you to think of it as a magic, sort of like a magic gadget, if you will, that like just does things magically without being able to explain it. It's a tool, it's statistic, it's math, that is a logic with it operates. And so I want you to go beyond that headline. I want you to go beyond that hype and actually figuring out what this technology is good for, and crucially what this technology isn't good for. And so I think that would be the first step in really thinking critically about ensuring that you are only adopting technologies that actually ends up helping you.
Perfectly said. And I totally 100% agree. I think a lot of us people would agree in the sense of, especially the line of work that we do, right?
Yeah,
We're in the
exactly.
nonprofit sector, philanthropic sector. There's, it's all about people, right?
Yeah,
People,
that's it.
or it how's it? Some people they have it allocated differently. You have people, purpose, planet, or purpose people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's
All the
all
P's,
relative.
yes.
Yes. It's all relative. So, my goodness, this has been amazing. Again, I really appreciate it on behalf of Setsi. We appreciate you. We'll definitely be collaborating. We have some things coming up. We have our uh, I think our sustainable finance forum, if I'm not mistaken. Victor is going to email you all the information. We
Yeah,
have our
awesome.
solidarity working group also, which has a number of nonprofits, philanthropic, so many different from wide variety of sectors like Social Canada and those things like that participate. So we'll definitely send you an invite for that because we would love to have you and maybe even be a guest speaker.
No, looking forward to it.
All right. So we will end the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Viet, thank you once again, and we'll be in touch.
No, this was fun. Thanks so much.
All right, likewise. Okay, bye bye.
Bye.